cookie. Instead of getting one cookie yourself, you would share this giant cookie or a few giant cookies with your table to get to know other people at the table. So I can only imagine what people were thinking when they had to share these giant cookies.
Yeah.
Hello! Welcome to The Corner Table, a Capital Times podcast about food and drink in Madison. That voice you just heard was Casey Bilyeu. She and Stephanie Ricketts ran Eat for Equity for 2 years, raising money for all kinds of good causes by making big cookies, biscuits, and bento boxes. Starting in March, they're back as Gather Madison. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians. I'm so excited this group is back in Madison, and I had a great time talking with Stephanie and Casey this week. Stay tuned.
Hi.
Can you guys introduce yourselves really quick, just so people know who's talking when?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Casey Bilyeu, and I'm I'm not a co-founder. I'm a co-organizer.
Co-organizer.
Yeah, of Eat for Equity and now Gather Madison.
And my name is Stephanie Ricketts, and I am the founder of Eat for Equity Madison and one of the co-organizers of Gather Madison.
So who is Gather Madison?
Gather Madison is a group of 5 of us, which is very exciting. So it's myself, it's Casey, it's our rad friend Luthien Nyland, Tom Kinsman, and then Rachel Strauch-Nelson.
And you're from all different businesses and backgrounds, right?
Yeah. So I work for a little consulting firm during the day called Next Generation Consulting. And so that's kind of my thing. I do events and marketing stuff. And Luthien is a lawyer, which is like a magical trump card in our pocket. She helps us with all of the legal things. And Rachel works for the school district. And I'm actually not 100% sure what Tom does. Do you know what Tom does?
I think he has a great desk job somewhere.
Yeah. I agree.
A really solid desk job.
Absolutely.
That's great.
And then Casey does Badass Floral.
Exactly. Yep. I work with a lot of brides and different companies in town to kind of bring the beauty of floral to either their events or their desktop.
So you make things beautiful.
I do, and I enjoy it.
That's great. So you mentioned Eat for Equity, and that's kind of how the precursor to Gather Madison, yes?
Yes.
So tell us what Eat for Equity was, and maybe describe a couple of your favorite memories from it.
So Eat for Equity Madison was a local branch of what was at the time a national movement called Eat for Equity. It was based out of Minneapolis, where the founders started the first branch. And we brought Eat for Equity to Madison in 2012. I did one meal on my own, and then Casey joined me right after that. Thank goodness. And so the basic idea of Eat for Equity Madison was to throw sustainable community feasts to raise money for organizations that were doing good work and to celebrate our local food scene at the same time. So we would do big dinners and small dinners, but most of them were a good size, and they would all have a theme based around our beneficiary, and they would incorporate whatever was in season at the time into a menu made entirely by volunteers, and we would raise money for different nonprofits in town. And we had about just a little over a 2-year run before life kind of reared up and made it impossible for Casey and I to continue. And so it's very exciting that then Luthien and Rachel actually approached us about revamping and restarting. And the national movement is not a thing anymore. It's just the Minneapolis branch. So we decided and thought about how we would like to take the values of Eat for Equity and the experience of Eat for Equity and translate it into something new. And from that came Gather Madison.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting is how you incorporated the nonprofit or the service organization that you were working with into the dinner itself. It really seemed like it was very collaborative. It's not so much just like, oh, I'm going to have a dinner and the proceeds are going to go to this place. It was much more immersive than that, as I remember. And I wonder if you can talk about maybe some of the events that are some of your favorites to look back on for Eat for Equity.
Sure. This is Casey, and I can jump in on that one. One of my favorite dinners would be the dinner that we did for Feed Kitchens, which was a community kitchen opening up on the north side of Madison. Feed was developed to be a community space where people could come in, use the space to cook if they were a small business and they needed a commercial kitchen. So in thinking about all the different types of food that could potentially be cooked there by different backgrounds and all different, types of people in Madison, we did a Taste of the World street food themed dinner. And it was a very intimate dinner. We had many, I think it was a dozen different stations with food. So it was at someone's home, and people would come in and try all these different stations of food, and it gave us just the freedom to try our hand at making all different types of food. For example, one dish that I made, because I love traveling in Central America, was ceviche. So that was a fun one. We had African peanut stew. We had some Lebanese dishes, and Stephanie is part Lebanese. And it kind of brought just the diversity of what is Feed Kitchens into a meal for everyone to try out.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like an extraordinary amount of work.
You know it. Yes.
Yeah. And that one was fun, too, because we didn't have a centralized, spot to prep. So we actually prepped over probably 4 different spaces and then brought it all together for the meal itself. It was very fun.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, did you have a favorite or two?
I did. It's hard to pick your favorites because each one was so distinct. But we did a farm feast, which was on Crossroads Community Farm. Cassie and her husband gave us a little portion right behind the fields to lay out a bunch of tables. It was like our Eat for Equity version of Outstanding in the Field. And we served these beautiful tomato sandwiches, which were donated also by the farm. And they were open-faced sandwiches that were just so gorgeous. Whenever I think of summer food, I still think of the sandwiches. And we had sweet corn ice cream that we made from scratch. And we made little farm animal, sugar cookies to go on top.
Don't forget the homemade caramel sauce I made to put on top of that ice cream.
I would never forget that. And it was just so beautiful. And it was benefiting Fair Share CSA Coalition. So we just kept going back to what can we make locally? What can we do to celebrate this farm and other farms? And at every meal, beneficiaries would also stand up and talk about what they did and who they were, and hosts. So in this case, Cassie stood up and talked about why they cared about that cause and why they let us, be there for the whole night. And it was just gorgeous. Middle of summer, on the field, as the sun set, having this dinner with all of these amazing people. And we also had kid volunteers who were a part of it, a group of brothers who are still some of our favorite people. They're a lot older than they were back in the day. Kids grow fast, but they are just as awesome. And so they were a big part of serving and of prepping the food, and it was a really magical night.
There's one that you talked about with Operation Fresh Start where you had kind of a forest theme, was it?
Oh, man. That was our most ambitious meal, even
Yes.
outdoing the Feed Kitchens one. The theme was Wisco Bento, and our beneficiary was Operation Fresh Start. And we were thinking about foods that, would be appealing to kids because Operation Fresh Start works with kids and also would be fun for us to make. And Casey and I got a little adventurous with our planning.
We sure did. We went from a city like the Isthmus made out of meatloaf was one of our ideas, which we did not do. But that's kind of where we started with the whole thing. And bento boxes, which are kids'
Very
meals
whimsical.
that, look really beautiful. So just to kind of highlight some of the foods that we made that evening, we made the lakes, Lake Monona and Lake Mendota, in soup, where I had a friend make fish cutouts, kind of like a cookie cutter for vegetables. So our roasted vegetables in the soup were actually fish that you could find in the river or in the lakes here. We had isthmus-shaped pizzas, which Stephanie's partner actually carved out of edible potatoes, the Capitol building, for each pizza. We had the fields around Madison, since a lot of what Eat for Equity highlights is local food, which is coming from the areas around Wisconsin. We had a ravioli dish in which we handmade ravioli, had a white sauce, which looked like fields, and then we used toothpicks and put broccoli, which looks like trees, all over each dish. That was also a lot of work.
Yeah, and Kelly carved farm animals for each of those.
Yes.
So chickens and cows.
All
and
made out of
sheep.
potatoes.
Yeah.
I feel like there was maybe a beet frog that you showed me a photo of.
Yes.
Also in the lake.
Yes, in the lake. Yep.
And then dessert was really just way cooler than I ever even imagined it would turn out, which was this sugar cookie forest.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not small trees, but they were big, freeform cut trees that were decorated with icing. And
Yep, and so everyone got a piece of the tree. Instead of getting one cookie yourself, you would share this giant cookie or a few giant cookies with your table to get to know other people at the table. So I can only imagine what people were thinking when they had to share these giant cookies.
yeah.
The Eat for Equity event that I got to go to was hosted at Madison Sourdough, and I loved it for a couple of reasons. There were some little kids, I think from the tribe, that was being served, and they were running around selling wild rice, and I bought a bag of wild rice like the third time he came over. But it was fun because the tables were kind of close together, and everybody was sort of like, I saw people that I kind of knew, and you sort of get to know each other a little bit. So Madison Sourdough serves breakfast and lunch, but this was a dinner. You've also used spaces that were a little bit more raw than that.
Oh, yes.
That's part of the work, right? Part of putting that all together. Have you had to convert some pretty interesting spots?
Church basement.
Yeah, church basement was our greatest challenge because it looked like, a church basement. It's not the most enticing spot to come for a benefit meal.
It's not a farm field.
No, it's not a farm field at sunset in August. But we transformed it. Our theme for that meal was really built around the story of stone soup, where everyone in the village comes and contributes something to the pot, and then it ends up being a nourishing, lovely meal. So that was kind of where we were going. So we wanted to transform the basement into a little clearing in the forest. And so we strung lights that looked like twinkling stars on the ceiling. And then we had some really amazing volunteers who painted a forestscape on pieces of butcher paper that we wrapped around the room. So it also made the room a lot smaller because this church basement was huge. And we just wanted it to still feel like you were describing, like a very intimate dinner that encouraged you to get to know your neighbor. So we built a forest wall around our meal to bring people in and make it feel really cozy and different. And I think we succeeded. It felt pretty magical down there.
I think you forgot to talk about the stones.
I did forget to talk about the stones.
Tell us about the stones.
So as part of that, building community is another big piece of what Eat for Equity was about, and what Gather will be about too. And we really wanted people to talk to each other and think about who they were sitting with. So we had at every place setting a smooth black stone, just different sizes, kind of like you can get for an aquarium, about 3 inches long, and a bunch of paint pens. And then each person was asked to think about what they were bringing to that meal. Whether it was curiosity, whether it was literally like a can of PBR, whatever it was that they were bringing to that meal that they wanted to write on the stone. And then we had volunteers go through with pots and collect the stones. And then later in the meal, the volunteers went through again, and these were again those fantastic brothers that we were working with, and they got to take a stone out and take that home with them. And I know I still have my stone. Somebody was bringing friendship to the dinner that night, and it felt really perfect.
Someone also brought joy to the dinner that night, and my stone sits in my kitchen.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea, too, because then you're looking around to see who got yours.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, and you get to meet that person in the community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fun. So tell me a little bit about what Gather is going to do. In what ways is it going to be different? Maybe what were some of the things that you learned running Eat for Equity during the time that you did? And what are some of the organizations you like to work with? So that's a bunch of questions at once, but
Yeah, in Casey and I had played around with the idea of Gather before Rachel and Luthien came and spoke with us. And so it's been awesome to kind of get to have their thoughts on what it's going to become in the mix as well. But I think some things will be very similar, if not the same, as Eat for Equity, like our commitment to local food and showcasing local food, like our emphasis on really building community and serving our community by raising money for these nonprofits that do amazing work. I think those things will stay the same, and we'll do at least some events in a similar format. But I also think Gather has the potential and the desire to be more expansive than what Eat for Equity was. We really didn't venture out of we make a meal and it raises money. We forayed into brunch for our final event, but otherwise we always did dinners, and they were always kind of a similar format, even if the particulars were very specialized. So I think with Gather, we're interested in doing that kind of thing and also something more.
I would like to see Gather bring in more funds for more organizations. As we were growing Eat for Equity, we were eventually able to bring in, a fair amount of money for each beneficiary that we worked with. But I think now that we have a larger crew, we can write letters. It won't be just the dinner that's bringing in money for these other nonprofits. I would love to reach out to other organizations to help out as well. That being said, in 2 years, we raised $20,000, just about $20,000 for a number of different organizations, over a dozen, which felt really good because, as someone in my late 20s at the time, there's no way I could have ever donated in any other way except by cooking and using my time in my hands to help our community. But now, a few years later, I think we've learned a lot, and I think we can also, find other ways to also help out aside from just doing dinners and aside from just that monetary influx that happens on one evening or one morning.
Yeah. And I think, too, the idea of doing other events that are a little less food-centered and a little more community-centered is something that has a lot of appeal for me, and that may sometimes not be as much about fundraising, but like getting out the vote or other initiatives that are really important in our community. So things that we can do to make really magical experiences that bring you closer together with the people you live with in this community and propel action in some way, in some positive, tangible way.
Are there some organizations that you've been looking at or maybe even talking to about working with?
So for our first event, we're talking with the Progress Center for Black Women, Sabrina Madison's new organization, and we're really hopeful and excited that we might get to partner with them for our first event because we're so inspired by what she is doing. We're also interested in working with Mentoring Positives or Community Immigration Law Center. We'd love to do a repeat maybe with our friends over at Fair Share CSA and some of the other super rad beneficiaries we had in our first round, in our first incarnation as Eat for Equity.
All of our meals are a sliding scale, and that is one way that we are promoting equity within Eat for Equity and now Gather Madison. Many of our meals were multiple courses, I think anywhere between 4 and 12 courses.
Yep.
So if you were to go to a restaurant and try and get even a 6 or 7 course meal, one would really be paying quite a lot for that. And we wanted to make sure that everyone was able to have a local food experience within their budget, within their means of giving. And that was a really big, portion of how we would create these meals that we felt like everyone could attend.
How often should we expect to see a new event from Gather? How many per year?
Well, definitely 4. Like we're going to base our year on 4 big events, 1 per quarter, and we're eyeing up March 3rd for our very first one. As we build capacity and as we grow, we hope to sprinkle in events in between those, the big 4, but you can definitely count on 4 exciting food-based events coming your way in 2018.
Yeah, and I think just to tag along on that, it will really depend, too, on how many people want to be involved. Gather Madison, just like Eat for Equity, will be fully volunteer-based. All the work that we do is aside from our day jobs. which are both multiple at this point. And it really does take a lot of time and a lot of planning, a lot of energy, and a lot of creativity. But with the number of volunteers that I feel like we're able to bring in, I think we really can do more than 4 big events each year if there's the interest out there.
Yeah. And the great thing about volunteering with Gather Madison, which is the same as was true with E for Equity Madison, is you don't have to have any particular skills. Like a lot of the volunteer work is kitchen work. You don't need to be able to dice something evenly. We don't care about that. You don't have to know how to, I don't know, fricassee something. You just need to show up and be excited and into it and willing to work with our group. And we all get in the kitchen together. We roll up our sleeves and we, make some pretty special things happen. So
you're doing something that is enjoyable or that feels productive.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the things that we really need right now, as much as this time last year too.
Yeah.
Is just to feel like we're doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that this time of year, and just where we are in this country at this point in time, being able to give back to your community, especially in a way that is tangible and hands-on. It just feels good when you're out there helping out.
How can people find out more about Gather?
Well, we have a Facebook page. We are tiptoeing our way towards an Instagram account, but you can find us on Facebook at Gather Madison. And you can also email us if you're like, hey, that sounds awesome. I want to be involved at gathermadison@gmail.com. And one other thing that I was thinking about was that when we had E for Equity going, we also had volunteers who never did any food prep. We had graphic designers who helped us make beautiful posters. We had musicians who would play music during the meals, which just makes it so incredible. We had photographers who donated their skill taking photos so that we could help tell the story of what we were doing and remember what we had created that night. And so there are just lots of different opportunities to be involved and to take the gifts and the talents that you have and really put them into service through this organization in a lot of different ways.
And I think that's the biggest part of Gather Madison that is a slight, or maybe it is the same as E for Equity, is if you have a skill and you feel you can use it for the betterment of other community organizations in Madison, let us know. Send us an email.
Yeah, we're into
Find
it.
us on Facebook.
If nothing else, you can help move chairs and tables.
Exactly. There are so many chairs and tables, always.
Well, thank you both for coming in today.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thanks for having us.
This has been The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison produced by the Capital Times. Our music was composed by Patrick Christians. You can find out more about Gather Madison in this week's Q&A in the Capital Times, found online at captimes.com. You can also subscribe to The Corner Table wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Facebook at Corner Table Podcast. I'm your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians. My wish for you this week is a sugar cookie decorated however you want it. I am a sucker for a smiley face. Stay warm, Madison. Cheers.